Hey, everybody. Glad that you're back for another edition of Just Getting Started. This is a really fun one for me because I called up my friend Dave Mandel. There he is on the screen. And I said, I really want you to come on and talk about comedy because life is pretty dark right now, Dave. And I just thought I needed someone to come on and share his experience with how he got started in the comedy world and writing. And you were my number one call. And your first thing that you said to me was, you sure? And you want to, if you want to cancel on me, that's just fine. And I thought, well, you're insane. Hi, Dave. Thanks for coming on.
You know, I'm still waiting to be told any second now. Oh, so-and-so just called back. So yeah, no. Okay,
wait a minute.
I'll go
was
for
that
it.
Chris
Yeah.
Evans? Sorry, Superman's on the phone. So I was thrilled to have you come on because number one, you and I have talked about something related to this. The world does not always need to revolve around celebrities or famous people for strange reasons or what have you. And I wanted to talk to you because you have written and been behind some of the most impactful shows in the television world. And it's a really hard nut
That
to
is
crack.
a very kind way of saying the movies I've worked on are garbage, but thank you. I appreciate that.
Hot garbage. It's kind of like the Secrets of Albus Dumbledore.
Let's not even talk about the movie stuff, please. The TV work is immaculate. So let's just stick to it, okay? Yeah.
It's amazing. At what point did you realize in your life growing up that you were funny? Or do you even realize that now?
No, I'm aware. I mean, it starts in a way that I guess, you know, in ways obviously you don't think of your career. It starts in ways where you are like, I don't know, like sitting like on the Upper East Side in New York City, like in a coffee shop with your friends, and you're making ice cream come out of their nose, but like regularly. Do you know what I mean? Like where again, and I was a very studious, you know, like chairman of the governing council kind of like, you know, must go to Ivy League kind of kid, but I was aware at least I could make my friends laugh. I was not the class clown. I'm not sure the majority of, I think, my elementary and high school, like people I went to with, like when I went into comedy were like, huh? Like didn't necessarily know me in that way. But I think if you were in my little group, like I was the really sort of wise assy, whatever, just, you know, quietly, like to just them. And so I was not unaware of that, but also at the same time, you know, the notion of like, you know, comedy work, certainly even growing up in New York City and I guess vaguely having some family friends that were working as executives at businesses and stuff, it didn't necessarily seem like a job or anything where it was like, oh, I'm going to do this, where you do hear stories. So I was doing a lot of the things that a lot of like future comedy writers do, like, you know, like listening and memorizing like old Steve Martin albums and like Saturday Night Live and watching Letterman and obsessing on it, but not with any sort of goal, not with any like, I'm going to be a comedy writer. I'm, you know, I was just so into it, and then discovered sort of later on, oh, you can do this. You know, I was sort of, it sounds silly, but I was sort of aiming to be just sort of I hope to be the most amusing lawyer at Skadden Arps. You know what I mean? Like that was sort of at the time, what seemed like an achievable goal. Like, let's put that guy on our mergers and acquisition team. He's really funny. Like that was the goal.
Kill it.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's like he'll do a fine enough job on the work. It'll all be a little later. It'll be handed in the morning it's due, but he's a fun guy to have around in the middle of the night. So yeah, but
he is
so
one
again,
wild and crazy guy in the court.
Yeah,
I get it.
Yeah. So it was sort of that, if that makes any sense. Like I definitely was aware of it, but didn't know you could do anything with it, which was sort of half the battle, I guess. So yeah.
Dave Mandel of Veep, of Curb Your Enthusiasm, of Seinfeld. It's kind of incredible, your hit list. What was your first foray in? And by the way, don't think I didn't hear the very subtle Ivy League. You went to Harvard. Yes, we get it. For those of us who could only dream.
I knew we weren't going to avoid it because you know, again, one of these things where, you know, it's like, how did you get your start? Well, I went to Harvard and I joined the Harvard Lampoon, which is what no struggling comedy writer sitting, you know, in Nebraska wants to hear, but it is what I did, you know, and for me, it was so, again, you're asking about the first professional stuff. And in some ways, while the Lampoon was obviously collegiate, it, in hindsight, and again, wasn't thinking this when I was there, but in hindsight, when I look back, that was the first time I was in a real writer's room, even though I didn't know I was in a writer's room. So I joined the Lampoon, which is the campus humor magazine. And then all of a sudden you're in this place with, a lot of sort of similar types of people that are all sort of, pasty and sort of, like somewhere on the spectrum when we all can't look each other in the eyes, kind of, and don't have the correct emotional responses. But all of a sudden you're kind of like, oh, this is my place. And what you sort of realize is, in these sort of, like, I'm going to try and make these people laugh. And again, now it's an extension of it, because that's all, I mean, in some ways, that's for me all it's ever been, which is just sort of like a desire to make people that I respect laugh, and to some extent get them to laugh, and maybe on some, ego level, to one up them if they're funny, to like sort of try and top them. Like that's a lot of what comedy is. It's sort of that sort of ego. And so the Lampoon was this first place where I all of a sudden felt like, and again, wasn't a job, but I acted like it was a job. I mean, I stopped going to classes. I was there, 24 hours a day, and it's what I was doing. It was my pre-professional, but again, didn't know I was pre-professional. You know what I mean? If that makes any sense.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of mystique to the Lampoon, just because of the myriad of the myriad
Yes.
famous writers and actors who came out of it, the association with the
Conan
hasty pudding,
O'Brien. Yep,
all
yeah, yeah.
that stuff. Jason Bateman in a wig on a bus somewhere. I mean, there's a lot of mystique that goes with the Lampoon and the comedy writers that came out of Harvard.
Yeah, and it was one of those things where, it sounds very odd to say as we sit here, in a quick digression into the history of the Lampoon. Once upon a time, its sort of editors were the finest, people at Life magazine and Harp. You know what I mean? Like those are sort of its origins. And somewhere sort of starting in the 70s, and then especially into the 80s, and then certainly for me into the early 90s, it really just started mass producing these sort of, Saturday Night Live, Simpsons, etc. people. And for me, what it really was that was where I all of a sudden discovered, like, oh, maybe this actually could be a job. Which again, let's there was nothing bad about that. It was just sort of like all of a sudden it was this place where I felt very comfortable, and felt like I'm like, this is what I want to be doing. And then also, oh, you can do it. And it was actually through the Lampoon, we did a summer project for, I'm taking you so far back, it's crazy. In 1990, summer of 91, the newly formed Comedy Central, which was at that point not available on all boxes. There had been the Ha channel, Ha, and the Comedy Channel. The joke was always they were each losing $10 million a year, and they combined them to form Comedy Central, so they would each lose only $5 million a year. Like it was like Time Warner and like somebody else. And they were not on all the boxes, and I think if you wanted it, you still had to pay like two extra dollars a month, which meant nobody had it. Certainly not my parents. And we did this thing called MTV Give Me Back My Life, and it was written by a couple of us Harvard Lampoon people. It was a fake 10th anniversary parody of MTV that we were assured MTV would fully cooperate with, and that they would be a part of. And needless to say, they wanted nothing to do with it and didn't cooperate with it at all. And it was terrible. I mean, it's not great. And it was just the most incredible experience of my life, where in some ways the not greatness was some of the best learning I ever sort of did, where all of a sudden I'm working on a real TV show, and all of a sudden people have to say these lines, and you go, oh, that doesn't sound good, or we should have rewritten this, or now we realize we have to rewrite this, and all of these things. And even just like the production aspects of thinking about how what you write becomes something. And I remember in the middle of this thing, it was shot on film, which looked really good. Oh no, sorry. Let me go backwards. The documentary part was all shot on video and it looked terrible and fake. And they built all these really wonderful sets of like, there was sort of a fake Bob Pittman character who was supposed to be the founder of MTV. The joke being the joke was he realized, oh God, it's so long ago. There was something about his bravery in putting a strong African American male like Michael Jackson onto
Mm.
music television. That was a big joke at the time. But anyway, but so all these like video scenes of these offices looked terrible and fake. But then there was an MTV spring break. It was an all drinking spring break, and we went down somewhere. Maybe we shot it here in LA, but they shot that on film, even though the real spring break is always broadcast on like live TV and looks like video. And if they had just done the documentary stuff on film, and you learn these lessons that like, again, like this is like the real world. And it was, like I said, it's terrible. And it was just the most incredible experience of my life, both in terms of just, I learned so much. And then the other big thing that came out of it was a consultant at the time on that show, and he actually played a part in it. He starred in it too, not starred, but was one of the talking heads in it, was Al Franken. And then Al basically and I sort of hit it off. And then I graduated and he brought me back down to Comedy Central the following summer. He was hosting comedy coverage of the Democratic and Republican conventions in 1992 and brought me down as a writer on that. That was my first like real gig. So I graduated from Harvard in Boston on a Thursday, drove down to New York on Friday, and started working like at full time on the show on like the next Monday, and basically got to write all summer with Al and another writer named Billy Kimball, who was the executive producer, and just wrote all summer. And really, in some ways, because it was this, we were filling the convention time, it was just almost like a little bit like a telethon, where it's just like we had a lot of space to try things. And it was things that people don't remember now, but like Dan Quayle's wife, Marilyn Quayle, had written a thriller, like an actual like
Oh,
thriller
right, right,
novel
right.
about a young, like I think senator from Indiana who saves the world from communism by defeating Fidel Castro in Cuba. And like Al started the week by like reading from the book. Like he would read live chat, like he would just read chapters and sort of act them out. And then he started doing puppets. And by the final night of the convention, we did like a full scene where Al like played the heroic Cuban like maid who like saves, just like, but like again, it was all silly, but at the same time we were just sort of like, it was very experimental in a really fun way. And it was just this, just again, this incredible learning experience, really learning how Al wrote comedy and learning especially about, for me, and again, I was a comedy nerd, but there were things I knew really well. But then I worked with Al, and he's such a huge Bob and Ray fan, just to sort of, and had worked with them and all this kind of stuff. And it was really the building blocks of his comedy, which was non-existent for me. I knew who they were. I appreciated them. I knew, Chris Elliott was Bob Elliott's son, but I didn't have that level of appreciation. And that was, and again, these sort of, again, building blocks where I sort of immersed myself not only in Bob and Ray, but just in this way Al approached comedy and sort of wrote these sort of pieces and wrote all summer together. And by the end of the summer, where we had, this really wonderful rapport, but also just, had also truly become friends. And I consider him my mentor. At the end of the summer, he basically said, I want to mention you to Lorne Michaels and Jim Downey and get you over to Saturday Night Live. And, so we did the Republican convention was in August. And by the end of August, I was at Saturday Night Live for what was the 92-93 season. For the first, I did 3 years at SNL. So that's sort of the journey to SNL. And again, another just these things, each one of them, especially these early ones, they're just such learning experiences, because again, now I'm still working with Al, and then you add Jim Downey into the mix, and comedy people know Jim, and he's got a little bit more PR in this sort of modern times. But, Jim is sort of, it's hard to explain Jim Downey. Sort of, he's been at Saturday Night Live, I think, since the second year of SNL, has been the producer, the head writer, the head of Update, all these things. And he just quite possibly is the funniest human being alive. And so learning from him and Al together, just when I sit back now and look at my own writing, I see both of them in my stuff and just what I learned. But again, also the Saturday Night Live experience, where every week you are almost like the mini, not exactly director, because there is a director, but they are the camera director. You are the one talking to the actors, giving notes. You're the one writing your script, almost like the mini producer of your sketch, so that whatever those 5 or 6, or unfortunately when SNL sketches are long, 7 or 8 minutes, you are, again, it's almost like you are the showrunner of that mini, that little mini period. And so again, it was just this insane, they were 3 years, but they were like, dog years of learning,
Yeah.
where I just, I came out of there gray haired a little bit, but also, just every year, especially of my first couple of years as like a professional writer, I think in a certain magnitude, I was a better writer than I was the year before, just in terms of just attacking things and just how to do the job, but also striving for things, and just learning about like what I wanted to do in terms of like, with the comedy, of just like, I get certain aspects of like, just not wanting to repeat things, and really wanting to do something that you hadn't seen. And a lot of those kinds of things that I like to think still with me now, but also how to craft a joke. I mean, just like writing basics, where, you go in as anybody does, with a certain amount of ego of like, I just got hired at SNL. I'm a comedy writer. And it's just like Jim Downey, Al Franken. Oh no, I don't know anything. You know what I mean? It's sort of this sort of incredible thing. And it was 3 insanely wonderful and 3 insanely just horrible years, because that's what Saturday Night Live is. And I lived in the office, I slept there a couple of nights a week. It just, again, wonderful and miserable. And I can remember throwing a monologue out and literally writing a monologue between dress and air, and getting it on cards and getting it up for like Emilio Estevez, because there was a whole thing that went wrong where there was a cold opening about the kid getting caned in Singapore, and the joke was he played the kid in the sketch, and then he comes out for the monologue, and the idea was we accidentally had caned him during the sketch, and so he was raw, like on his buttocks and his back where he had been caned, and the caning in the cold opening froze the audience. We had to rewrite the entire thing, so that they kept winding up but didn't actually thwunk. Like every time he actually got hit, like that was such a story at the time that the audience kind of was like, ugh. So the caning monologue got thrown in the garbage, and I wrote a monologue, I think about like him and whatever happened to the rest of the Breakfast Club, but literally wrote it at 11:09 p.m. and he performed it at 11:35. And so those kinds of things, like to this day, I can remember that adrenaline rush. And again, wonderful and awful. And by the end of 3 years, I was more than done. And I left. I came out to LA. I came out to LA with, of course, I was a New Yorker, no driver's license. So I was like living at the Mondrian Hotel, taking taxi cabs everywhere, because there was, again, no Uber. So I was just like calling independent taxi and having them drive me places. And I started taking driving lessons, and I would hire the driving lesson to pick me up at the Mondrian Hotel, and the lesson would be me driving to the CBS Radford lot, and then I'd get out at the CBS Radford lot when the lesson was over, and I'd go to work at Seinfeld. And I worked there obviously with Larry David. Larry's the one that hired me, and really learned to write sort of sitcoms. I mean, again, talking about more mentors, the next mentor, and really everything I know about writing sitcoms, about running a sitcom, really is from Larry, and Jerry too. But Larry then with Curb too, just like Larry, just the ways in which I can remember, again, I'm watching TV forever, huge TV fan, huge Seinfeld fan. Had some stories approved. I put it up on my whiteboard. I outlined my show, and I just remember Larry kind of coming in, and what I had is like a full act one of like a show. When he was done with it, he just kind of like mushed it down, and it was like it was two scenes of the show, and all of a sudden it was just like click, oh, I see. And what he was doing was getting rid of all these unnecessary things, forcing things into the one scene together, piece of information. And what ends up happening is I was what I thought was halfway done. Now I'm two scenes in. So where I'm going to get to ultimately is so much deeper and farther and more interesting, because all of a sudden there's all this more available real estate. And that was a part of it. But again, from Larry, really just this, and especially when we moved on to Curb Your Enthusiasm, again, he started it. I had nothing to do with it, and then kind of joined him later. With Jeff Schaefer and Alec Berg, because we needed an office, and he was kind enough to give us real estate space, and we kind of started helping him out, and then kind of formalized it and started sort of, directing and exec producing and writing the show with him. And just the full on, it's just not worth doing if it's just not the funniest. I'll say effing, because I didn't ask you if we're allowed to curse or not. So
Yeah,
effing
you're allowed to curse.
thing. We're allowed to curse. If it's not the funniest fucking thing in the world, there's no point to it. And if that means, I remember Larry doing, as far as I'm concerned, the first, like we did a joke about it was all about the plastic casing that Amazon used to send everything in, and how hard and impossible it was to like open that. And so there was a scene, and I can remember the line, Jeff or Susie's like, use a box cutter. And we pitched Larry the line, or maybe we even had it in the outline. What am I, Muhammad Atta? And again, this is really close to 9/11.
Yeah.
And I just remember only Larry David, only this show. I mean, I hate to say it, only us. And it was, when you hear it now, it's a pretty funny fucking joke. But at the time, I think it also took your breath away. Like you couldn't believe you were hearing it, but also that you were laughing at it. And that's Larry, and that's Curb. And again, just that all comes with me. And it's there in Seinfeld too. It's in the DNA of Seinfeld, but it really, I don't know, metastasizes into Curb Your Enthusiasm. And beyond that, just the way he, just like no notes, no interference, just this is how we do it, not using a traditional writer's room where writers are like, oh, it's your turn to write the script and all of that kind of stuff, and kind of this gang write thing. Just learned, again, from him in some ways, just a full aversion to that, and really giving writers individual responsibility to go off and write their episode and things of that nature, which, again, I'll get in as much into any part of this that you want, but just like, again, like when I look at how, when I eventually then took over Veep from Armando Iannucci, how I ran the show, how I wrote the show, is all of that. I mean, again, there's Jim Downey, there's Al Franken in me in terms of like the jokes, especially we were doing a lot of politics, and I did a lot of, political humor on SNL, and I was a government major at Harvard. But how I ran the show, how I put it together, how I constructed the show was very much Larry David, Curb, and Seinfeld. And so, again, all part of that journey. And maybe then and there at that point, I sort of felt like, okay, now I kind of know what I'm doing. So, a process.
In 30 years of interviews,
was there a question? Or did you have a question?
I've never had more follow-up questions in my life. I kept thinking, oh God, make a note. Oh God, make a note.
Sorry, like,
oh, God,
I realized, like, I've been speaking for a very long time, and if you're listening to me on like whatever 1.5 or 2, I don't know if you're keeping up. But anyway, yeah.
I got to tell you, if you're listening, I think you're with me. Okay, let me try to imagine what I think your questions are, and we're gonna unpack a lot of stuff, because this is so fascinating.
Why didn't you
Okay,
have a
ready?
driver's license? Yeah.
This is so, first of all, I will always drive you from now on because you will get lost. You are one nonstop Mulholland Drive. And I love this. Okay, stop. Here we go. Number one, who was the
Yep.
cast in 92 when you joined in SNL?
It was a really fascinating time for SNL. It was right at the end of the glory days of Dana Carvey and Phil Hartman. So they were like the heads of the cast. Kevin Nealon, obviously the late Chris Farley, Sandler, Spade. So those were the guys on the younger guys were sort of on the uprise. And I believe at the end of my first season, Dana left. And then I think at the end of my second season, Phil left. And I think at the end of my third season when I left too, I can't remember if Mike Myers left then or after the second season. But anyway, those were the guys that were kind of leaving. And Kevin Nealon had been doing Update, and then he gave that up. And then Norm Macdonald started doing Update. Now the late Norm Macdonald, just too many late people. But so that was sort of that cast. And it was a fascinating time because it was this really weird. I mean, first of all, number one, I remember like when we first, when I first got there, again, nothing to do with me. It was that election year. And, certainly one of the big sketches I worked on that it was a sketch that Al and I wrote, and then Jim threw a bunch of stuff in that is still one of my favorites, was the Clinton going into jogging into McDonald's. Remember the way he used to do that all the time? It was him going into McDonald's and then explaining the Somalian warlords by stealing food off people's trays and shoving it in his mouth and go warlords and whatever. And I mean, that was Phil Hartman at his just,
I loved him so
best.
much.
And so those guys kind of fade. And that year, I think the show won an Emmy, not for writing, unfortunately, but we won an Emmy. And then those guys started sort of peeling off. And then, of course, the Saturday Night Dead articles started. But it was also this weird thing. But by the end, when a lot of the quote unquote adults had left, we actually did a sketch at the beginning of that third season of like, who the hell is going to play Clinton? And the joke was sort of, this is what Adam Sandler's Clinton would look like. This is what Farley's would look like. This is what Tim Meadows would look like, what Spade's Clinton would look like. And Lauren ended up hiring Michael McKean to have like an actual, really funny and great guy, but also an adult in the cast. And he ended up playing Clinton, but it was this sort of, it was a very strange time at SNL. That final year I was there, I think the cast ballooned up to like 17 people because Lauren was just sort of throwing things at the wall. So it was this very strange time. 92 to 95 is my my long answer to you.
What was your favorite skit that you wrote?
Ooh, the Clinton McDonald's would be up there just because it was certainly, I still love it. I think it like every part of it works. I can watch it right now. And again, it's of its time in terms of the warlord story, but it does work. I loved doing commercial parodies. And when I look back, which is sort of a little ironic because it's the least live part of Saturday Night Live, if that makes any sense. You actually shoot them and then you film them and you edit them, which maybe somewhere in there was a message to myself. But I love that. And Jim Downey had this explanation of Saturday Night Live commercials that has always stuck with me, which is non-existent problem, ineffective solution. And his joke was always like, there was one about like, do you have rats climbing out of your toilet? Well, here's a product that will put them to sleep for an hour. And it's just sort of like, no one has rats climbing out of their toilet. And if you did, you wouldn't want to put the rats only to sleep for an hour. It was called Sleepy Time Rat something or other. And that weird philosophy of just sort of stuff. And I don't know if I always followed it, but like I did one called That's Not Yogurt. I did action figures for the movie Philadelphia, like children's action figures where it was like Philadelphia, and it was like, it's gay attorney Andrew whatever and his longtime companion Miguel with real net and laser action. They had all these weapons that obviously were not in the movie Philadelphia that I'm quite fond of, that I wrote with a couple of people.
Saturday Night Live just seems to be such a crazy place to work with the deadlines that you're talking about. And with the crossover of cast, it seems to be a place where you're working at a show that's the best of the time, or at least it's Saturday Night Live. How do you know when it's time to go?
How do you know when it's time to go? For me, I was unhappy. I mean, I honestly, and some of that probably was, and I've been back, and I've been back since I've gone back. I went back years ago once with Jerry Seinfeld. When Seinfeld ended, I went back with him, and then I went back with Julia when she hosted once as well. And it's definitely changed. It's the I think people stay longer, and part of the reason I think they stay longer is they have lives. And I don't know. They definitely have lives. I can sit here and I can also say to you, we never left. And some of that was, I think, in a good way, Jim Downey, and maybe in a bad way, Jim Downey. But we rewrote sketches, into like 5 in the morning, and some of it was fucking around, but also we also really rigorously rewrote sketches with Jim sort of from on high, often just adding these touches to these sketches that radically changed them and made them better. Was it worth it? I don't know. I definitely, like, I am a better writer for watching and learning and as he rewrote sketches, but I had no life. I mean, I know that none of us really had lives. Even people that were older than me that were married were not home. You know what I mean? Some of them occasionally tried to sneak out and come back. It wasn't fun. Somewhere in that third year, we started, I'm very aware of, like, we were going to the after party, and then we were seeking out like an after party, like late night poker houses and nonsense like that. And at some point, I don't know, you're sitting, and my big thing was I always came home, whatever time it was, and I watched the show on videotape, because being there live, it always seemed better than it was. And when you went home and watched it, you really got a real sense of what the audience was seeing. And when you couldn't hear that amazing live audience, like right there when it was on camera, so I'm sorry, when it was on television, and it's not surrounding you in that same way, and the energy doesn't come through like that, the sketches live and die much more on their own. And somewhere in there, especially as it phased into that third year, the shows definitely didn't seem as good. So then you start to go, I'm killing myself and the show isn't great. And somewhere in there also, I was very aware of, like, boy, I drank a lot of wine on Saturday. Again, I'm not talking about like 7 days a week of drinking, but, like, I don't know, when you have a job and you're not happy, like, creatively, and also on Saturday night you feel the need to go play in an all night poker place, and you drank a lot of wine, you start to see, in a great world, you say to yourself, it may be time to move on. And that was a combination of those things was definitely on my mind. And also again, that's a big part of the answer. And then the limits of the format, the limit. I mean, incredibly wonderful. You can do anything as long as it's sort of 5 minutes. And I remember starting to have these ideas about, like, breaking format a little bit. And we definitely did one or two things. We did a show when Charlton Heston hosted. It's one of my, you were asking me about favorite things, one of my proudest moments. We did a thing where Charlton Heston, in the cold opening, falls asleep, and then he wakes up, and the show is now on the planet of the apes, and it's all apes. Like, we did full ape makeup. We brought in we found the guy who owned all the Planet of the Apes costumes, and we brought them in. And so it was an ape show with apes doing sketches and humans in, like, chains and stuff. And it was full wonderful insanity. And he gets captured. They throw a net over him, and he says, take your hands off me, you damn dirty apes, live from New York. It's Saturday night. And then they let me reshoot the entire opening montage, the whole, like, it's Saturday night with Chris Farley. So instead, it's Saturday Night Live with, it's Saturday night with General Ursus, Urko, Cornelius. And so it was all Planet of the Apes people, and except it was 8 people in New York nightclubs doing, like, that kind of, like, that
That's
thing.
amazing.
And then, like,
Yeah.
all the crowd shots were apes, and there was, like, an ape roller skater, like, I reshot the opening montage. And then when the monologue starts, two apes bring Heston out in chains, and the entire audience is apes, and they don't believe a human can speak. And that's the start of a Saturday Night Live episode, in 1993 that I will. What again? My working with Heston, the ape stuff. I mean, it was incredible. If it had been up to me, I would have done something like that every week. You know what I mean? And you start to, I don't know, again, not exactly chafe, but the limits of the format. And so, you know, I will simply say Saturday Night Live was a dream. And I definitely, though, I wanted more. I wanted to do the sitcom thing. I mean, I'll be very honest with you. If I'd ever gotten the opportunity, I would have killed to work for Letterman. I it sort of never quite happened. I guess I did Saturday Night Live, and I certainly wouldn't trade that. But I wanted Letterman. I wanted to work for more than life itself. But anyway, I came out to LA.
Why? What was
That
it?
for me, staying up late and being, tired every day, the next day. It was just like that to me was like, I've never seen comedy like this at the time. It was so different than everything else that was, and it was sort of like that Letterman detached irony, the sort of show that makes fun of it being a show. Again, these are not original thoughts, but just especially I remember completely not appreciating Johnny Carson. I can appreciate him now, but I could not. It just seemed, I don't know, like I sound like a weirdo. Like it seemed square. I don't know. It just seemed old and old fashioned. And then Letterman with like the guests he had, and I don't know, Bill Murray, and I just was like so different. And I can remember right up to the end when he left NBC. There's a moment like in his second to last show where he's about to bring out like I think like Bruce Springsteen or something, and the crowd starts going crazy before Springsteen even is coming out. Like they're going crazy because they know he's bringing out Springsteen, and they go so wild. He's like next up, and the crowd's just like whoa, and he's like, you don't know what I'm gonna say, and they're like whatever, and he goes, all right, well, Paul, and he says something like it's time to gas the audience or like kill the audience or something, and it's crazy hostile, and it's so funny, and that's Letterman, and I would have loved it, I think, or hated it, who knows, but that was where I always wanted to go. But like I said, I wanted something else, I guess, at that point. That was the real reason.
And then your career fell apart because you landed on that crap show, Seinfeld. What a total bummer. What was your entree to Seinfeld?
A very strange entree that will be helpful to nobody who's like, what tips can I take here? My entree was I was watching the show. So let me start. That was my entree, which was I think I came into it a little late but much earlier than a lot of the world in America. I think I had missed the initial sort of summer run of 5 episodes and kind of came to it during that next sort of that second season, which wasn't a full season either, but kind of discovered it in there and was watching it on Wednesday nights when, at that point, critics were mentioning it, but most people weren't mentioning it. And I was really obsessed with it because, again, you talk about things you hadn't seen before. Obviously there were, shows. I mean, I was a huge, New York City reruns at night. I was a huge Odd Couple and Honeymooners fan, which was Channel 11, WPIX from 11 to midnight.
Uh-huh.
And, both those shows, New York City, two guys living in an apartment and Alice and Ralph living out in wherever they were. So those were New York shows. But the idea of four New Yorkers in cruddy apartments sitting in a coffee shop was about as close conceptually to what I was doing with my time and what I had been doing in high school. I talked about making my idiot friends laugh. That was happening not in Monk's Diner, but it was happening in the Tramway Diner on 59th Street. It was happening, in diners up and down the East Side, because in the West Side, New York City, diners stay open 24 hours, and you can just go and sit. You get a grilled cheese, and you get a fries, or you get a soup, and you're good to go. And so,
your Tom's Diner. Your Tom's Diner is my school diner.
Yeah, it's just it's a place, and it becomes your hangout, and all of a sudden, there's a show with people hanging out in a diner in just a way that just was baffling to me. And, again, everyone joke, the show about nothing. And I never thought it was nothing, but they were talking about the same nonsense that I felt like I was talking. Now, none of my friends were stand-ups. None of them were even comedy people, but it was that obsessive level of grudge holding and whatnot that just, that just spoke to me. And so I was aware of it as a fan. And then Jeff Schaefer and Alec, who I mentioned, they were a year ahead of me in school, and we had written the MTV show together. And then they graduated. They had worked in LA, and they were in New York for a while on the early Conan O'Brien show. And then they were going back out to LA to basically pack up and come back to work at Conan full time when they got hired actually at Seinfeld first. And so my first exposure to the show was actually visiting them during my off weeks. I would just come out to California more or less to stop myself from going into the SNL offices. And I would kind of sleep on their couch, and eventually they had a guest room. And basically I stayed on their couch, and then I just would go to work with them. And because I had nothing to do and I didn't drive, whatever. So I would just go to work with them. And it was a funny thing where Larry had worked at SNL, Jerry had hosted SNL, a couple of people, Carol Leifer had worked at SNL, Peter Melman, I knew his brother. So it was sort of a room, Max and Tom, Gamble and Pross, they had worked at SNL. So it was this funny thing where I was sort of like the entertainment a little bit. I was the guest. I was the lunch guest every day. And I would just kind of go in, see everybody at breakfast, hang out in Jeff and Alex's room, and sort of help them with whatever they were writing for the show, which was really fun to do because it didn't seem like work. I didn't work there. I was just throwing in stuff. It was fun. And then come out for lunch and hang out with everybody and tell SNL stories and whatnot and kind of go back in. And I did this all throughout the year. I mean, I didn't work there, but I was there all the time. And at the end of that year, which was the end of my third year at the show, Larry came through New York and was sort of like, hey, why don't you submit some stuff for the show? And I actually never even got around. I was working on his submissions when he kind of called me and just said, "You're hired." And I was like, well, I didn't show you any submissions. He's like, yeah, I talked to Downey. It's fine. And I do remember when I was like pitching out, I think one of my first Seinfeld episodes, I pitched him something, and I think he said something to me like, "Was this on your list?" Because that's sort of how you would pitch. You would work a list, and was this on your submission list? Like this was an idea I was going to pitch him to get the job. And I was like, yeah, this was on my list. He goes, okay, I would have hired you. And I was just like, oh, okay, good. So anyway, but yeah, that was sort of how. So I kind of was a friend of the show before I actually worked there, which was actually a very lovely way of kind of entering that world where, unlike SNL, where when I started there, I barely knew anybody. I was at the time, I think, certainly I think at the time I was like, it was August. It was the last month of my 21st year. So I was still technically 21 when I got to SNL. And I was just afraid for the first, year probably, but certainly the first, like I think I had like a 13-week contract. And I remember it was my birthday and I woke up, went to work. I was scared to make a phone call and I had never given anybody the phone number. So my 22nd birthday, I did not speak to anybody I had known for more than other than Al Franken for more than like a month. And nobody knew it was my birthday. That's how sort of on edge I was. Whereas, when I kind of started at Seinfeld, it was almost like I'd already been there a year, which was a very nice transition. It was like I did the summer program or something. So that was a very nice transition. But anyway, that was my entree into Seinfeld. So yeah.
I love Jeff Schaefer. For those of you listening, it's his idea of the show Dave. He writes and directs that. He's obviously Larry's
He's still doing Curb, by the way. He's still doing
longtime collaborator with Larry on Curb, and all around great human being. So it's kind of fun to talk about him as well. What was your favorite episode that you wrote
of Seinfeld? Probably, yeah. I mean, I liked them all. Don't get me wrong, but when push comes to shove, the Bizarro Jerry for me, which is a little ironic, only because it was actually the year after Larry left. And I honestly couldn't begin to tell you, and I never want to think about whether Larry would have approved the episode or not. I don't ever want to go there in my head. But it was, it was very much, it was based in the sort of world of Bizarro Superman, who was Superman's opposite. So it was very comic book based, which is a real hobby of mine. I'm a collector. I collect original comic art. I collect movie props, whatnot, all that kind of stuff. And so it was comic book based, and Jerry was very into comic books. And then within it, every story on Seinfeld was often very personal, but it had a bunch of things in it, including, which she doesn't enjoy me saying, the man hands characters in there, which was, I'll say, loosely based on my now wife, Becky, where she grew up she grew up on a farm in Maine, and she always used to complain about her hands being very rough and sort of whatever. And I always joke, because she grew up on a farm, whereas I grew up as this sort of, I was raised by my mother as this, to the manner born, you know what I mean? And, these hands have never done an actual honest day's, work. And so I have very beautiful, soft, delicate hands. So anyway, the rough, dry hands became large, monstrous man hands, because that's how you wrote Seinfeld. You took things from your life and you magnified them, or you did them to the power of 10 and you change them, but that's the original idea. The original idea becomes this other thing. And so that's in there. I mean, there's just a whole bunch of stuff in there, and it just and again, not to loop back around, but not exactly format breaking per se, but certainly format breaking adjacent, in terms of these sort of Jerry and George and Kramer's opposite numbers and this bizarro world within the show. And we changed the theme at the end of the show. It's a bizarro theme version. I love that. Later on, Peter Melman and I did a backwards episode based on Pinter's The Betrayal, called The Betrayal, where it works backwards, and it's about Jerry having an affair with George's girlfriend, and George knowing about it and working backwards, like the Pinter play. I don't think Harold Pinter has any idea we did it, but we did do it, and I'm sure he would have hated it. But the entire episode is backwards, and it is the backwards episode. And again, I love that. I mean, it's like my great regret in life is I had one other idea for an episode, a Seinfeld episode, that we never got to do because Jerry ended the show, and I always wanted to do it. And it was another format breaker. The idea was going to be, the gang goes on a vacation. I don't know. Jerry would have had like a gig or something, and everyone would have gone along. And it was basically going to be like the bad version. I never got into like, where is it? But let's just say he goes to Mexico, to like a resort town, to like perform. I guess it could have also been a cruise ship. It would have been another version of it. But the gist of it was, so they go to wherever, the cruise ship, the hotel, wherever. And then in the hotel, you have Jerry's hotel room that becomes your set. And you see only sort of the sitting area of the hotel room, with the bathroom more or less where Jerry's bathroom is, and the bedroom back there. And then across the hallway is Kramer's hotel room, and they're coming back and forth. And then there's a Mexican cantina that they keep meeting in, or the bar downstairs that becomes the coffee shop. And so the idea was it would have been in Mexico, but it would have been the show, but not the show. And it's my great Seinfeld regret.
I mean, everything else is rebooted. Why can't they reboot that for one night? Everything else is, come on.
I think we're all good. We're all good. But that would have been, that was the one I always wanted to do. I think it is, to his credit, I think there were a million reasons Jerry ended it at the time. But, his core philosophy was certainly leave people wanting more. He talked a lot at the time about the Beatles, and, it wasn't lost on me somewhere in there that there was like a Fab Four, like Entertainment Weekly cover of some sort, and the desire of like, is part of, I mean, the Beatles are the Beatles, but part of why we love them is because you can't, and I'm not talking about what eventually happened with the deaths, but they ended it, and therefore you couldn't have any more Beatles. And the going out on top, the leaving them wanting more. There's a lesson in there that I definitely absorbed, and so it's good it's done. But yeah, that would have been a fun episode.
What was the greatest difference then in transitioning from Curb and Seinfeld, or from Seinfeld to Curb? What was the greatest difference in how the two shows are put together?
Well, I mean, DNA wise, they're incredibly similar. I mean, obviously different characters, it's Larry, all that kind of stuff, but the DNA is very similar. Obviously, you don't have the network restraints, and so obviously there's the cursing, and the subject matter maybe gets even that much more intense. Obviously the biggest thing, it's a huge difference, but it's also not a difference, is on Seinfeld, we pitched out an idea, we outlined it, and then we would write a script. Um, Everything happens the same way on Curb Your Enthusiasm, but there is no script. But the outline is as detailed as any outline in the world, scene by scene, what has to happen, the key components, and occasionally a couple of important key jokes. If they're important to the plot, those jokes are in there. And then Larry and the group improv, and we sort of shape it and punch it up as we go live, which is wonderful. It's almost like doing live television. It's like it's like punching it up and making it better without like this net, which is incredible from an adrenaline work experience. But what people don't understand is that the outline, you could give me a Curb outline that I didn't even work on. You could just give me like whatever they're doing right now, whatever Larry and Jeff are doing right now. You could give me one of their outlines and I could turn that into a script in 24 hours. That's how
Wow.
tight those outlines are, because all the heavy lifting is there. All I would have to do is write some chit chat in between the pieces that need to be there. And so it's radically different because of the improv, but it's exactly the same. And that, and again, maybe just more so. Again, it's like, if Larry was George, or if I should say, if George was a side of Larry, Curb Larry is that much more a side of Larry. I mean, so there's that magnification. And one of the things I always love about the show is just that he's not afraid to play it as TV mogul, Seinfeld creator, rich guy Larry David, and that there are rich man's problems. And sometimes when he enacts revenge, like by hiring an orchestra, as only a rich guy can, which after 1,000 years of everybody sort of playing, I live in a small apartment in New York City, there's just something funny about a guy like willing to play, yeah, I have a giant house in the flats of Brentwood. You know what I mean? Like I there's something about that I enjoy as an evolution of television. So wherever that fits.
Yeah, and it's funny how it doesn't feel obnoxious. It just feels expected of him.
No, it just is. But that is the other, there's an incredible lesson in there, and it goes back to Seinfeld too, which is, one of the shitty notes that you get all your career is, especially, the dumber the executive, the more you get it, is sort of like, I don't, the bad version, we always used to laugh because there was an executive that used to say it was, I don't like our guy. I don't like our guy. I don't like our guy for doing that. And it's just sort of this likability thing. And at this point now, I think I've made a career out of working on shows where the people couldn't be less likable, but they are cast with wonderful, charming, charismatic people that make you like what they do, in spite of the fact that's often what they are doing or saying, certainly in the case of Veep. It's horrible. And if it was wrongly cast, you would hate Selena Meyer. Again, just as an example, or Larry David. And by the way, there are many people that don't like Larry David. It's like there are people to this day that go, I can't watch it. It makes me uncomfortable. I get it. But it makes them uncomfortable, but they rarely hate him, if that makes any sense. Do you know what I mean? They don't like the experience, but he is likable, even though it's an unlikable part. And that is what dumb executives can never understand. And they're just so worried about, I don't know, like rounding and smoothing off the rough edges that you get nothing. And I definitely, I think one of the things that I love about the stuff I've worked on is it's all sharp edges, which I think is necessary.
You should have said to the executive, "I don't like you." Maybe you wouldn't have been renewed, but you could have tried it out. Comedy.
At the time, a lot of the things we say now, at the time, again, you learn, again, you talk about like career lessons and learning. You're at that phase of your career where it's just like, okay, yes, sir, yes, ma'am. I mean, it is what it is, and sometimes I look back and I go, I wish I hadn't made those changes, or I wish I hadn't done that. And you learn those things. Whereas nowadays, I'm just not going to make that change. If I disagree with it, I'm going to explain to you why. And at some point, if you're going to order me to make that change, then we're probably done and you should find somebody else. But I'm not going to make that change. I'm not going to make a change that ruins the show, that I'm then either stuck with that change and having to then, whatever it is, every week deal with the fact that somehow you gave them a lovable nephew that has a lollipop, whatever the shitty changes or whatever. It's like, I'm not going to do that. I wrote a show a couple of years ago. It was sort of it was actually right before Veep, or it was a last attempt at trying to do I still love, from Seinfeld, I do love and I do miss the classic 3-camera sitcom, with a live audience and all of that. And I tried one last time for CBS, a show that I really liked. I won't get into it just because I continue to still hope one day it'll be something. But wrote the script, everybody loved it, or I should say, co-wrote the script with Scott and Shauna Silveri. Wrote it, everyone loved it. We went into casting. It was a weird year where the kind of people we wanted were just not available, or they were on a show that, a year later, those shows ended, but it was a bad year and we couldn't cast it. And we definitely got to that point in the casting where there were some, again, very nice folks, very like network sitcom people that the network would have approved to make it. And I just had no interest in those people. And we ended up we never shot the pilot. I think we built a set and we never shot the pilot. And I will go, again, I don't know if I'll ever get a chance to try it again, which I hope someday I do, but I will go to my grave very happy that we never shot it, because to this day, it is still once in a blue moon that really good script that we never did, or that really good script that somebody remembers, as opposed to the shitty so-and-so pilot with one of the desperate housewives trying to do comedy. And I will simply say, whatever, 24-year-old David Mandel casts whichever desperate housewife to try and get that show on the air. And those are, again, you talk about learning things, but those are lessons that it's hard to teach when you're 23 or 24 years old, like that, and again, at the time, maybe it was the right thing to do to cast whoever they wanted, but it never actually works. Anyway, I've confused myself, but anyway.
No, look, you get to make different decisions when you've already established yourself. When you're in your 20s, you're just trying to stay alive.
Yeah. Yes,
it was survive and advance. I mean, that's what's really happening.
You're trying to get to the point where you can say that's stupid. I mean, to some extent.
Or when you can say no. And for any of you listening, it takes a long time. Not everybody just gets to be. You have to do some of that crap you don't want to do in order to survive and advance. You mentioned, sorry.
Oh, I was just saying, we used to joke, like, one of the greatest things that we used to talk about, and to this day, but in the Seinfeld offices, was this thing that they used to call the fastest no ever, which was the time NBC called up Larry and wanted to know, they were going to do like Blackout Thursday, where there was going to be a blackout and all the must-see TV shows were going to be like there was a blackout in New York because all the shows were in New York. And if you watch the evening, it's like, I don't remember the order of shows, but it's like 8 o'clock, Friends, there's a blackout, Monica and and they're stuck in whatever. Chandler's stuck in an elevator, and then I can't remember what was at 8:30, but it was like the single guy or something. There's a blackout.
Single guy.
Yeah, so there's a blackout. 9:00, Seinfeld. No blackout, no mention of the blackout, nothing. And then 9:30, whatever. There's a blackout.
Frasier, there's a blackout. Yeah.
And it was just, Larry just said no, and it was just like, possibly the most important lesson I took from Seinfeld of just no. Yeah.
No is a very, very valuable word. Yeah. Fear is a great motivator, and no is a valuable word. You mentioned sharp edges.
Yes.
And when I think of sharp edges, I do think of Veep. And yes. I love Veep because it was sharp. How did you come come over there and take over?
In a very, I guess, as everything else, sort of serendipitous, strange way, which was, I was a huge fan of the show. They wrote it, over in the UK, Armando Iannucci, an all British team of writers, directors, producers. They shot it in Baltimore. Loved watching it. Was, obviously knew Julia from obviously Seinfeld. Was just a huge fan. She ruins you for just every other, I was about to say actress, but she ruins you for every actor in general that you'll ever work with. I get the call out of the blue that basically Armando was going to leave, and nobody knew this thing. And unlike other sitcoms where, you hear things, people talk about other shows, like in your writer's room or whatever, like word hadn't leaked. Like, it was shocking to me that he was leaving. And I didn't know any of this. I know it now, but basically Casey Bloys felt I was the one. Casey's now the head of all of HBO and everything, HBO Max. At the time, he was the head of comedy, and Armando was leaving. Julia and HBO wanted to try and keep it going. And, I guess, thank God for him, he felt that I was the guy to do it. They had plucked, Jeff, Alec, and I were doing Curb with Larry. So to some extent, they did this to Larry. They had kind of plucked Alec away and put him on Silicon Valley. And so that had worked very well. Originally, Silicon Valley was put together by Mike Judge. Alec wasn't involved. They added Alec to that mix. So when I guess it came time for Veep, it was sort of like, okay, what's the next Curb guy? Okay, Dave Mandel, come on down.
Let's screw Larry again because he doesn't have a good show to get back at us.
Well, at the time, I guess technically we were sort of in a non-Curb period, although obviously that eventually changed when he came back, which was, I wish there'd been some way to do both. But so Casey suggested me. Obviously, I knew Julia, but I went and sat down with her and, just start, Armando had sort of written the show into this wonderful corner with the Electoral College tie. And so it was this combination of meeting with Julia and talking to her, but then also kind of reading the scripts and then watching this sort of really wonderful, weird, really like almost like, how the hell do you get out of this thing? Like if this tie happened. And then as I started, because it was such a problem, as I started to think of like things I wanted to do, and every time I would kind of come back to Julia with more thoughts, whatever, and then, we'd bounce stuff around. And it just, before you knew it, it was like I was doing it. I mean, it's hard to, I don't know, it was sort of like, I thought it was interesting, but the more I thought about it, the more just stuff just started, whatever. And in some ways, I always say, like, out of those early conversations with Julia, we laid out a lot of like what became the 3-year run that we did. Now, obviously things changed, Trump, just things like really changed, because so much of what Veep was became almost very old fashioned. And I've talked about this elsewhere. The show, if you watch early Veep, the shocks are these faux pas, maybe this inappropriate language, the getting caught on film saying the wrong thing, or this idea that on front of the camera, these people are, pretending and trying to do the right thing, but behind the camera, here's this reveal. And obviously Trump just upends all of that, because all of a sudden there is no behind the camera. He's saying things, he's saying things like, whatever, he's groping whatever, and, and he's still elected president of the United States. So the fundamental basics of Veep went out the window. Basically, it just made the show pointless, useless, and in some ways outdated, while we were, in theory, prepping our final season, which got delayed because of Julia's cancer. And I have jokingly said in some ways her cancer was the best thing that ever happened to Veep, because had we just simply shot the show that we were going to shoot, which would then have aired during that first Trump, like whatever, Trump getting elected and whatnot, the show would have been, I don't know. I don't know if we would have pulled it off the air. I can't imagine HBO would have let us do that, but I cannot tell you how people would have just been like, that thing's done, that thing's whatever. But because of what ended up being the cancer, sort of had a chance to kind of throw a lot of the original plans in the garbage and really try and stay. And we barely did. By the end of that last season, we were a half a step ahead of what was going on in the actual Trump administration. But it was, this just crazy wild thing. And again, I'm glad we ended it when we did. I mean, I have no doubt people wanted more, but everything had changed. And I believe we got out just in time. And in some ways, the most fascinating thing is, and I'm sure some of it is, now that you have HBO Max where anybody can go on and watch all of Veep right now if they want to, in a way that even with whatever HBO Go and on demand, I don't think people did. I feel like I see or get sent more headlines and things as America gets stupider and starts actually trying to implement things we did on Veep. Like a couple of months ago, the entire whatever House and Senate passed a daylight, trying to end daylight savings, which was something we had Jonah Ryan doing because
Yes.
our consultants had advised us that this would be one of the stupid. We were trying to come up with what would be his Ronald Reagan, let's get rid of the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit, like these sort of micro issues that you build a campaign out of. And getting rid of daylight savings seemed like the stupidest thing we could come up with. And now it's getting, it's a legitimate point of American politics now. And that is what has happened to America. And so that happens. And like, I'm seeing Washington Post, headlines and editorials with pictures from Veep. We haven't been on the air in 3 years. I mean, I find that Veep is only becoming more relevant off the air in this very bizarro way. And it's just crazy. But obviously looping back around, glad we ended it when we did. Glad we got out just in time. And, it was a different show for me because obviously it is less of that sort of like, this guy did this and this guy did this, and then how do those stories bounce into each other? But construction wise, you are setting up a lot of these little loose stories that in a perfect world are kind of finding their way to bump into each other somewhere near the end. Or, Selena, because of this issue, ends up screwing up her other issue. And so the structure and all of that kind of stuff. And again, what I learned from Larry, structure, outline, outline, outline. It's why those outlines for Curb Your Enthusiasm are so good that you could write a script. That's kind of what I tried to do with Veep, and just really kind of, it's a different show than what Armando certainly did. It has similar DNA. I took it where I took it because that was the only thing I could do. And it was really fun. It was really,
The
it was really
dialogue,
enjoyable.
the dialogue was so crisp, so tasty, and the pacing of it was frenetic, and yet you didn't feel the anxiety that you felt with Curb. I can't describe it other than to say that you had to hold on to the side of your chairs because you weren't sure what the hell was going to come out of her mouth next.
The pace was it was always a fast show, and I do think I even perhaps stepped on the accelerator a bit. It was a combination of a couple of things, which is one, I love the pace. I give me Billy Wilder, Some Like It Hot, Billy Wilder 1, 2, 3, just that rat tat 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 kind of thing. And obviously that is certainly present in Seinfeld, a little differently in Curb. The improv, it has it being a little more languid. It's still jam packed, but a little more, almost I think what makes people uncomfortable on Curb is that moment of Larry, that kind of one more thing, almost like a Columbo kind of moment. But with Veep, especially with the large cast, as we were jamming it full of more and more and more, and just trying to make sure that everybody had a little bit of something, and it just got so jam packed. And I just found that, like, in the edit room, I could just take out, I could, on the floor, I could fill if there was any kind of a pause or a blank spot where I could stick in, a Richard Splett line for Sam, or a line over here for Gary Cole as Kent. We filled every available blank spot with a line. And then in the edit room, I took out anything that wasn't necessary and any breath of air. There's none. And I'll put it up against 1, 2, 3 in terms of the pacing. Usually there's a moment towards the end of the episode when things sort of turn in on her, where you get a little of that curb, like, oh no, but there is less of that right from, because, with Larry, right from the first moment where, he's walking by and sees a woman with a baby and he starts to go, excuse me, miss. And you go, oh God, what's he going to say?
Yeah.
It's a different energy than that. But just this incredible, insane ensemble where I could just give them anything, and just incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. There was not a weak person in the character list, not a single person where you felt like they were,
I feel like
creating a lull.
You could have almost
void.
made shows out of any one of those people, which was and yet they were in some ways, just, again, it's almost like, I don't know, like, they talk about like with boxers or, tennis players. It's like the guy that like hits with John McEnroe has to be fucking great. You can't, what I mean? Like the guy that's going to spar with Muhammad Ali, like, has to be really good. And that's some of it. I'm not saying that was the philosophy. I think the philosophy was just simply to get really funny people. But like, Julia knows that she is incredible, yes, unto herself, but she is triply incredible because she is hitting the ball back with these other people that she is not afraid to let also be fucking funny and let them have their moments and shine. And that's part of what makes Veep just work in just this insane way.
You mentioned it, so I'll follow up.
Yeah.
If you had to do a sequel on one of those characters, who would it be?
Oh boy, so hard. Honestly, it sounds silly. I love. They're all incredible. I think the answer for a lot of the world, I feel like, would be Jonah. And
yeah,
you'd have to surround him with a lot of different energy, because I think you can't just have like 10 Jonahs doing Jonah things. So I'm certainly, that's an answer. And that character just has, in some ways, that character is modern politics. So Jonah, and certainly Tim is a delight. And then the other answer would be, if I would kill to do more President Richard Splett. Sam Richardson, obviously just a dream, but I guess I having done the sharp edges, and again, not that Sam's edges are sharp, but they trick you. You get close to them thinking that they're covered in bubble wrap and that they're going to protect you, and then you realize they're sharp. It was such a different Veep energy within Veep that I love what he did with that character. And I was really proud, because he was a somewhat newer character when I took over. I had a little more, I had room with all of them, but I had maybe a little even much more room with him, because there was not as many seasons of defining him. Anyway, the Adventures of Richard Splett would be very fun too. So
I mean,
Vice President Jenna Ryan or The Adventures of Richard Splett. So yeah.
Only if you have his flogged assistant behind him who just took it up the ass every time something came out of his mouth. I mean, some of those back and forths and some of that dialogue was just, dare we say, delicious. It was just insanity. Oh. David, what's next for you?
I am in the edit room. That's where I will hang up with you, and I will head to the edit room for White House Plumbers, which is a 5-episode HBO miniseries that I believe any day now they're going to tell us when it actually is airing. But so I'm not allowed to say anything quite yet, but we are working to finish it. If that helps, but I shot that all last year during COVID back east, and am now editing it as we are, I think, approaching one of these Watergate anniversaries. But just a really interesting story about obviously it's about the guys that did the Watergate break-in, who on some level are usually the people that you only see in the first 5 minutes of the Watergate movie. And then they go on to like Woodward and Bernstein or Inside the Oval Office or all of those things. And those people are kind of minor characters in this story. This is like who these guys were, why they broke in, where they were in their lives, and what it kind of cost them in some ways. And then along with that, what's really, I think, fascinating and I think comes through is you really are seeing the birth in some ways in the, late 60s, early 70s of that kind of, forgive me, I'll simply say nutso, but you can use nutso as you see fit, but that Republican true believerism where like, I'm going to get sick and die from COVID to prove a point. And that is the Watergate break-in a nutshell, even though obviously it's two very different things. And in some ways, again, one of these things a little bit like Veep, where when we started it, it has only become more relevant as we are working on it, if that makes any sense. And it's funny, but it's not a comedy. It's an hour long 5-episode miniseries, and it is funny, and it is funny because the plans and what they did and how they did it was just one fuck up after another, but they all paid just terrible prices depending on who you talk to. And it's an incredible story, not often told. I always sort of say a little bit, it's almost like a little bit like the Reservoir Dogs version, where you kind of get to see the guys after the robbery. It's a little bit of like, well, what happened to those guys that, get arraigned at the very beginning of All the President's Men? You know what I mean? And this is the show where you will actually go into the prison with them and see them in jail. And like I said, see the cost of what it did to their families and stuff. So at some point that will be on, but that's what I'm editing as we speak. So yeah.
Someday on HBO.
Someday on HBO, I'll come back. I'll re-announce it then. That and that's what I'm working on right now. And am I allowed to? Can I plug my podcast? Can I plug my podcast?
I wish you would. I wish you would.
It is completely unrelated to this, but if you have any interest in collecting, it's about movie prop collecting. It's called The Stuff Dreams Are Made Of, and it's about movie prop collecting and all sorts of aspects of the collecting world. And I co-host it with Ryan Condal, who's the showrunner of the new also HBO Game of Thrones House of the Dragon spinoff. So if you like that or any of my stuff or collecting, come on down, check us out. Stuff Dreams Are Made.
I would like to. I will check it out myself. I'd be delighted to.
Please,
and I can't even imagine.
I think you will enjoy it in a nerdy way. I think you'll enjoy aspects of it. It's about.
I can't wait to see what you guys have. I mean, I can't even imagine what you guys have between the two of you.
You get to see some Stormtrooper helmets. I'm not lying. You get to see a few. Yeah.
I mean, can I try one on?
No,
I'm just saying.
No,
I mean,
no Kim Kardashian putting on the goddamn Marilyn Monroe dress. Nothing against
Don't
your
wreck
head.
my
It's
day.
lovely. Your head is lovely, but it's not going in my Stormtrooper helmet. I'm sorry.
No, please don't wreck my day with a Kim Kardashian mention. I just can't take it. Dave, you're a revelation, and I'm so grateful that you took the time to do this. I hope I distracted you from your edit.
Lovely, 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 and off I will go now. But thank you.
Oh God, it's my pleasure. Come back soon, please. We'll talk again when Watergate, when the plumbers come out. Perfect. We'll have you back on and get it all out there. But yeah, check out his podcast, everybody. And I am thrilled that you guys took the time to listen to this. I thought it was incredible. I mean, I'm so sorry for all of you who have more questions.
Lowest rated episode ever.
You're insane. But here's the good news. Use our Just Getting Started Pod Instagram handle to send in more questions, and I will ask them of David by torturing him and showing up at his house at unexpected hours of the night. That'll be great. So thanks, everybody. Hope you enjoyed this episode. We will see you next week.